Hi everyone, welcome to the May 10th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I am David Aragona, taking a look at Saturday's card at Belmont at the Big A this upcoming weekend. 11 race card on tap, and it's one of the better cards that's been drawn in New York so far in 2024. We're going to talk about the middle pick five sequence. I think there are three pick fives on this card. We're going to talk about the one that is a mandatory payout pick five in the middle of the card, going from races 4 through 8, and it does cover most of the stakes action on this card. There are 4 stakes in total. One of them, the Bogey, which only drew a 5-horse field, is outside of this sequence, going as race 2. But this pick 5 in the middle of the card does span 3 of the races that are stakes events, including the Grade 3 Runhappy, the Grade 3 Peter Pan, and the recently downgraded Grade 2 Man of War, which did come up a pretty strong field for a Grade 2 this year. That's part of the sequence. There are also a couple of turf races in the mix, so we're going to go through all of it, and I'm happy to have DRF analyst for New York, Mike Beer, on the podcast with me this week. Craig is out. He's doing something with his daughter. She's, I think, graduating this week, so happy to have Mike filling in for Craig.
Dave, thanks for the invite. I'm sure everybody's going to miss Craig on this week's podcast, but I'm happy to fill in. I'm glad I got the invite. I'm looking forward to these races too. Actually, as you mentioned, pretty good card here for a Saturday Belmont at the Big A. It's not the same. Listen, they're still at Aqueduct. It's not the same. Belmont's supposed to be open right now, but I'll take this card.
I know I feel obligated to call it Belmont at the Big A because, you know, for ADW purposes, like we're not listing it as Aqueduct. So, you don't want to lead people in the wrong direction, but yeah, we're at Aqueduct and it's a little bit different. It definitely feels a little bit different. But we did make it through the long winter at the Aqueduct meet and, plenty of cards that maybe didn't come up so strong on the weekend. So it is refreshing to have this Saturday card with 11 races. I don't know how you felt, Mike, but handicapping this card, it took me a really long time. I found opinions difficult to come by. Some of the stakes a little thinner than others, but still not the easiest races to handicap. And the 2 non-stakes races that are part of this sequence I found to be particularly difficult.
I agree with you. I thought this was a super challenging card. And like you, I mean, I'm glad that you said that. It took me forever to get through this thing. Listen, usually the guys in the office are looking for that analysis that I have to write at a certain deadline, and I did not make it tonight. This was a pretty tough card.
Yeah, I think I overshot the picks deadline by about 15 minutes, which is pretty typical for me, but this card definitely warranted it because it's tough to sift through some of the form in a few of these races, especially the turf race that we'll get to. And handicapping the 5th race, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Mike, it makes me wonder if some of the connections we're thinking races on this card could come off the turf because there was a little rain predicted Thursday into Friday. It seemed initially like the forecast for Saturday might be worse than it is. A lot of horses switching surfaces on this card to try turf for the first time. I don't know if connections were thinking they might find a better dirt race, but it makes some of these races especially difficult when you have horses switching surfaces like that. And you do encounter that a lot at this time of year when the turf season returns and you have horses that were competing throughout the winter at Aqueduct now having the option to compete on 2 surfaces, and a lot of connections just want to take advantage of it.
Yeah, you're right. It's a little different. I mean, you're always used to at this time of year, especially in New York, horses coming back off of layoffs that you haven't seen. So you always have to deal with those. But you're right. That 5th race in particular, there's so many horses with dirt form that are entered for the grass. Are they going to run? Are we going to get scratches out of that race now if that race does stay on the turf? I mean, there are a couple of horses in that field who haven't been on turf in a while, but do have back turf form that made them, at least mildly interested in that race. But it'll just be interesting to see who actually shows up and who doesn't.
Yeah, we'll get to that one in a little bit. This sequence does start off with one of the stakes races. It is the Grade 3 Runhappy, and we should get right into the handicapping since there is a lot to go through in this pick 5. And as we begin to talk about this 4th race, I will share my screen and we'll take a look at some of the PPs on DRF.com. I'm going to start off by showing the TimeformUS PPs for this race because I think we're going to have to talk about the pace projector in just a second, Mike, because the horse that's shown leading on the pace projector is really the center to this race, and that is the number 1, Straight No Chaser, a horse who last year seemed like he was right on the cusp of maybe becoming one of the best dirt sprinters in the country. And this is a division that could really use some stars. And it feels like Straight No Chaser was about to become that horse. But as soon as he ran the best race of his career in the Maryland Sprint, he was just as quickly onto the sidelines, missed the rest of the year. It's now been almost exactly a year since we've last seen him. He's returning in this race. I think the connections have been searching around for the right kind of scenario in which to bring him back. And I think they found a pretty good spot in this Runhappy, but it's a difficult way to kick off this sequence, because you've had this horse that is going to be a pretty short price. I mean, it's just based on his form. He's a horse that I think people are excited to see come back, and those horses typically do take money. But you've got a horse coming off this kind of layoff, and is he the kind that you really want to trust in the first leg of this sequence?
Yeah, that's the decision you have to make here when you're starting off this pick five. I mean, to me, just based on this field in its entirety and who he's facing here, he's pretty clearly the best horse in the race. I'll put that in the air quotes there, because that stuff can all be relative. He's super fast, though. He's found a spot here where, I don't know, man, is anybody going to be able to go with this horse early in here? Durante, there was a time sort of towards the end of last year where he was razor sharp, and it felt like maybe he would be a pace factor in a race like this. I don't know if he's in that kind of form anymore. Listen, you never want to take a short price on a horse who's been away for a year, and it's not like he's been away for no reason. I mean, there were real issues with this horse that forced him to the sidelines, and so you always have to be wary about what you're going to get. It's a great spot for him. He might just be the fastest horse early. It feels like if he's close to ready, they're just going to have a really tough time beating him. You mentioned that most recent start, the last time we saw him on Preakness weekend, where he was super impressive. I will say the two big figure wins, the last two starts for this horse, they are, trips where he just had no stress on the front end. He took no challenges up there. He was loose throughout, and he dominated those fields. I personally, David, and you can touch on this a little bit if you want to, or maybe you have no thoughts on it at all. I thought with this horse, the race that pointed him out to me early on was his Malibu. This horse finished 7th, beaten 7 lengths. He ran great that day. And to me, that was the race that made me think he could be a top sprinter this year if things go his way. And I felt like they were going his way until that Preakness weekend when everything went wrong.
Yeah, because it's interesting. They started him out as a turf horse. He had that allowance victory where it seemed like you said, things went his way. You kind of wonder if horses like that just get out in front are really natural dirt horses. But he proved in that Malibu when he was off the board. But I mean, he tried to really hang in against horses that were a little more advanced than him at that stage of his career, going 7 furlongs, which is probably a little far for him. And he tried really hard that day. He's improved in every start since then. His last two just kind of tower over this field from a speed figure standpoint, especially if you're looking at the buyer speed figures. Not too many horses in this field are consistently running triple digit numbers. Yeah. The Maryland Sprint, it wasn't the toughest race. Nakatomi, who was one of the other horses to take money in there, he's just okay. And the runner-up Prevalence didn't do much prior or since then. But he beat them by over 7 lengths. So I don't really want to get too involved in what he was beating that day. I guess the concern with him, Mike, is just why has he been away for so long? I mean, the connection said there was some kind of bone issue. I forget what the exact phrasing was, but you never want to see that stuff. And you have to wonder a little bit if he's going to come back as sharp as he was. He's a 5-year-old now who was a little bit lightly raced even when he made his debut halfway through his 3-year-old season. He's clearly a horse that's had some issues staying on the racetrack. So we'll see what we get from him. I'm sure the connections wish they hadn't drawn the rail. I'm sure they wish that the main pace rival wasn't directly to their outside and the number 2 Durante. And I do want to talk about Durante a little bit, because I think it's pretty easy to just say, draw a line through his last 2 races, because first of all, he probably doesn't even want to go a mile in the 5th season. And then he stumbled so badly at the start, he had no chance to get to the front and then no chance to be successful. And he's not really a turf horse. I mean, he can handle the turf, but he's much better on the dirt. And his dirt form for Jacobson prior to that was so consistent, obviously not on the level of Straight No Chaser, but should we be a little worried that he might possess the speed to get in the favorites way early?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll see if he's going to be able to run one of his really good races again. When he first got into New York last summer for Jacobson, I mean, he just ran one good race after another, this horse. I do kind of feel like maybe he's tailed off a little bit as the races have gotten a little bit tougher. I'll be honest, I don't know what to do with the most recent start. I'm not totally shocked that Jacobson tried him on the turf. As you mentioned, he's run on turf before. He's run okay on it. He's a way better dirt horse to me, but they just ran him last week in the elusive quality. Jacobson has been on record. You can, take this for what it's worth, but he was looking for an allowance race for this horse, and he only entered him here back quickly because it came up a short field, and he figured, why not just take a shot here? Maybe it'll work out for him, David. I'm also a little, I look up Jacobson in Formulator. I feel like he's the kind of guy you don't want to get too caught up with trainer stats with, but it's not like he's a guy who's looking to go turf to dirt, like maybe to pick up a horse's form. His numbers switching from turf to dirt, they are not good.
Yeah, Jacobson is a difficult trainer to really assess in a lot of situations. I will say he seems to do better than you might expect when he places his horses aggressively.
Yeah.
Maybe this is just helping a race go. He's got two horses in here that are probably serving that function. We'll see. I've been a fan of this horse because he's a real fighter. I mean, when you watch his races, he tries really hard, and even when he loses, he's
Yeah.
reluctant to give it up. So I just like a horse like that possesses those attributes. But kind of like you, I feel like his ceiling might not be quite as high as some others in this race. And I guess that should bring up the number 6, Joey Freshwater. What are we supposed to do with this horse who got a 105 buyer last time? You'll notice the number is a little bit lower when you're looking at the TimeformUS past performances. But the final time number of 124 was right in line with that buyer. He just got a downgrade due to the slow pace. We always have pace downgrades for races that feature slow paces and dirt sprints. But regardless of any of that, I mean, this horse ran his final quarter in just a tick over 23-1. Actually, he was closing a little bit into it, so probably around 23 seconds. He flew home in this race, and I'll pull up the replay as we're talking about it. Is this just the new version of Joey Freshwater, or is he going to come back down to earth?
I guess that's the main question, isn't it? Obviously, if he runs this race back in this spot, he could really give even the good straight no chaser. A streaming straight no chaser comes back and he's ready to fire off the layoff. This race right here that Joey Freshwater wants could give that horse a run for his money. He looks great in this race. Yeah, the pace is slow. He's just sitting on the outside, but he flat overpowers this field and runs away from them through the stretch. It's a fast final time. I also felt like David, and listen, this horse had, he was a grade 3 winner last year. He placed in a couple of other stakes races on the dirt. I was not a fan of his last year. I didn't think he ran that many particularly good races as a 3-year-old, but he came back off the layoff, I thought, in January with a super performance. I thought that was the best race he had ever run until this one, obviously, where he just took it to another level. I don't know if he's going to be able to run this race back, and I don't know if I'd be wanting to take a short price on him doing that. But I think it's pretty clear that he's pretty well spotted here, considering that this is a graded stakes race. And if he runs that race back, he's supposed to be pretty tough.
Yeah, Linda Rice isn't just running horses in graded stakes races willy-nilly. I mean, she runs horses where she thinks they can win, and I think she's found a pretty good spot for this horse. My take on Joey Freshwater, Mike, is I think his undoing last year, I mean, part of it might have been just racing too much because he did seem to sort of tail off, but he doesn't seem like the kind of horse that wants to get run off his feet early. He wants to sort of get in that rhythm and click off those 23-second quarters in a 6 furlong race every step of the way. And I think the slow-paced races really do suit him. And I think how much pressure Durante applies to straight no chaser in the early stages could be critical to the chances of Joey Freshwater. And it might sound counterintuitive, but I'd almost rather see him perched 3 wide, a length off the leaders through a high 22 opening quarter, as opposed to them running 3 or 4 lengths away from him in the early going, because I don't think he's that horse that wants to sit lengths off the pace and make that run. So I imagine Linda Rice would be happy to see him get the exact same kind of trip that he got last time, and it might work out that way. I don't fully trust him, and he's kind of the obvious other horse in here, so I don't necessarily want to go in that direction. I had kind of a crazy idea in here, Mike, and you could tell me if I'm just kind of searching too much with this horse. But I've been a fan of the number 5, 24 Mamba, and to me, it's kind of undeniable how well he ran on December 9th, which was his breakout performance. I mean, the pace was fast that day. He was chasing this horse that just ran off on the front end, going too fast. He reeled in that horse with a furlong to go. The race completely fell apart behind him, and he still was able to hold on for the victory. I thought he got a legitimate 118 TimeformUS speed figure for that race, which puts him in line with everybody else in this race, aside from that last performance of straight no chaser. I thought he kind of backed it up with that win over Swift next time. Valid excuse in the Tom Fool when he blew the start. He just kind of hopped up at the break and was out of position every step of the way. I also don't think that was a sloppy track where you wanted to be coming from nearly that far back. His race at Laurel last time, it's a problem. I'm never quite sure what to make of these New York connections that ship to a place like Laurel and their horse runs poorly, because it feels like sometimes they just don't ship well and they come back to form. I'm hoping that's the case with 24 Mamba, because it feels like you can make some excuses for him. He was in great form, and now he's going to be a price. I do like him turning back a little to 6 furlongs, but he's going to need straight no chaser to not show up.
Yeah, well, just about everybody's going to need straight no chaser to not show up. But there's a real, I feel like there's a way to look at this race and feel like that is at least a possibility. And if you want to look at the race that way, then you can sort of open it up to other horses. And I have no argument with anything that you've said about 24 Mamba. You're right about the December race. He was super in there, and I really liked his race right after that, where he was just a really convincing winner. does he have to take another step forward? Probably. Is he really a graded stakes quality sprinter? I don't know, man. That's something he has to prove. The one thing that always holds me back with 24 Mamba, you mentioned the poor start at the Tom Fool. He actually ran pretty well that day. The start really cost him. He also didn't break great at Laurel last time. It's been an issue for this horse several other times in the past. He's just, when he's good, obviously he gets out of the gate, he can get a really good position, but more often than not, this horse, he's very poor from the gate, and it's cost him over and over again.
No, that's a really good point with him. There was that race at, I think, Belmont last year where he dwelled very badly, and hopefully it's not an issue in this race. But in making a case for him, I was just kind of thinking, straight no chaser, going to be super short, and I get leaning on into this race because it's not an ideal race to find an alternative. But horses like him, I just wanted to be a little skeptical of, and I wasn't quite satisfied with Joey Freshwater being a 1-number horse, and it just kind of led me in that direction. But I would need somewhere close to that 12-1 on 24 Mamba. Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, and it's kind of the race that we were teeing up at the start that made this one especially difficult. The 5th race, it is an optional claiming $35,000, though I don't think too many are actually in for the $35,000 tag, just one in the main body of the field. Really, it's a starter allowance race, and 10 horses within the main body going this 6 furlong distance on the outer turf course. And Mike, I'm not even really sure where to start in this race because it's so competitive. So many horses have questions to answer. I guess the two that bookend the field are two that kind of make a certain amount of sense. Borletti, who has been in great form recently for Rick Dutrow. And even though he didn't run well on the turf when he first came to this country, maybe you could say he's just a different horse now. And then the 10 Power Attack, a horse who earned a big number last time on the synthetic at Gulfstream Park. But you could go back through his form and say, well, he was a 2-year-old when he was running his prior turf races. And he just made that one start as a 3-year-old and something apparently went wrong and he was off for a long time. So maybe he is that horse that can run a faster speed figure now, like he suggested last time. So for me, they were kind of the two to begin the conversation with. But I don't know that I necessarily would want to rely heavily on either one of them.
I'm going to agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think they are the right starting points. There's a lot going on in between these two horses in this field. But I think they are the two right ones to start with. I'll admit I'm very interested in Borletti. There's one thing that's really holding me back from really wanting to like this horse. I'm not sure that I care too much about those first 2 turf starts in this country late last year. They shipped him over as a maiden. He ran in 2 tougher races. I don't know if you have a take on this that you want to just throw in there. The Saratoga race, it almost feels like there was something amiss with this horse during the running. He was in a perfect spot in that race, and it just felt like Rosario, for whatever reason, this horse he didn't feel right underneath him. He never asked this horse to run. And then it's basically eased him out of the race through the stretch there, almost like something was wrong. And then he came back and he actually ran okay in his second start. I mean, he was right there. He had every chance to win at the top of the stretch. And it just kind of feels like maybe he wasn't good enough and he sort of faded through the stretch there, but at least he did some running. My big issue with this horse, David, is that even if you want to be lenient on the turf form, he's now in good dirt form, which is going to draw money his way. It's Dutrow and Irad, which is going to pull more money his way. I think he's an interesting horse just based on his turf races. If you feel like maybe something was going on there and he's a better horse now, and I think that's a valid way to look at him. But I just don't want him at a short price, and he feels like he'll get bet for all the wrong reasons.
100%. I considered him making him the favorite in this race, and looking back at it, maybe I should have, because he drew better than Power Attack, and he's got Irad and the strong connections. We're recording this on Thursday. I just watched Irad Dutrow horse take a ton of money and not run particularly well in the race earlier. It just feels like the connections really do pull in the money, and like you said, he's going to get bet off the dirt races. I will say he had a valid excuse last time. I'll show the beginning of that dirt race on April 5th, where he really did have some trouble at the start, and I thought he ran okay to be fourth after that. That was probably a starter allowance field of reasonable quality, and you could see him in those Michael Dubbs silks just kind of getting steadied back at the start of that race. Just wanted to make people aware of that. But yeah, he's a flawed horse to really rely on, and it's kind of funny. Not that Kodiak, and British sire, is some great dirt sire, but it was kind of interesting to watch Aqueduct this winter. And there were these 2 sons of Kodiak, Chuck Willis and Borletti, who were okay turf horses, but really seemed to move up on the dirt. And I wonder if he just is a better dirt horse. I'm not convinced that he necessarily has to be better on the turf, even though he's got that Euro pedigree. As for Power Attack, Mike, I don't know what your take on him was. He did kind of have things go his own way last time in that synth race, but I could also just kind of buy into the idea that maybe he's a horse that just needed time to mature.
Yeah, I could buy into that too. I mean, I didn't want to put him on top in this race as far as picks, so just because he's not going to be a great price. And he is coming off of a race, the most recent start on a different surface where they dropped him, which, listen, I'm sure they weren't terrified if they were going to lose him for 50,000, but they dropped him off the layup, and then he just gets absolutely loose on the lead. I mean, it was basically a workout in that race. Nobody challenged him, so he wins. Okay, he still looks good winning to me. I liked his turf sprint when he broke his maiden last year. I thought he had another soft trip that day. He was just fastest early, but I thought he looked good winning that race. And then it's, 3 straight stakes races after that. I don't really care about any of that stuff. I feel like he's maybe, though you made him the favorite, I think he maybe deserves to be the favorite in here. He's just not the kind of horse I'd be looking to bet straight up at some kind of short number.
Where are you looking to go in here? Because the horses in between these two, a lot of them are switching surfaces. A lot of them have form that maybe is unreliable or moving up in class. I mean, I honestly tried to make a case for almost everybody in this field, so I'm interested to hear who you like.
Yeah, no, I was the same way. I looked at everybody. As a matter of fact, one of the horses we were sort of referencing earlier on, who it feels like maybe they just might be entered here in case this race comes off the turf, is the 5, Can't Beat the Rock. Who's in decent dirt form right now, but has races on the go back on turf that would give him a real chance in there. I mean, listen, I'm the last one that wants to go back 2 years to get to the turf races, and that's what you have to do with this horse. But he ran a couple that would give him a real chance in here, and he made exactly one turf start in California last year in 2023 against way better horses. He's not my kind of horse, but I thought he was mildly interesting in this race. I will say one of the horses who I don't like, who I feel like could take money in here and who makes a certain amount of sense on paper, is the 6 P Money. I mean, maybe he's just pretty good and I'm not giving him enough credit, but he won his turf debut at Saratoga where they conceded the race to this horse early, let him take over, and he just didn't have a straw in his path that day. I didn't think that was a true performance, and I know that he ran even better in his next start on the turf, but that's a race it's pretty hard for me to get behind that race. He's 1,000,000 to 1. The horse that wins the race is 1,000,000 to 1, and they just go 1-2 around the track with nobody else doing anything. I don't know, man. I couldn't buy into him, and I feel like he'll take money, but maybe I'm just totally wrong about him. I just sort of wanted other horses here, and they are somewhat surface switchers. One of them was the 8 Showdown King. We'll see what he does on the grass here for the first time, but I feel like there's a scenario here where this is kind of what he wants to do, and that he could wind up getting the right kind of trip here. He's second off the claim for Linda Rice, who's going to switch surfaces. But to me, listen, the more I looked at it, and I feel like in some ways this could be a little bit of a cop-out. But in other ways, I just feel like this horse could be in a good spot. And that's the 3 holding the line. I will wait and see what kind of price he is. You made him 6 to 1 on the morning line. I like this horse's last race. He didn't do really any running in his debut at Gulfstream Park last year. They debuted him in a $100,000 stakes race, which isn't a big deal. That was a field of 10. I think 6 of them were first-time starters, including the 1-2 finishers. And this horse didn't do anything in there, but the 1-2 finishers of that race are actually really good. And then we didn't see him again. Ward came back off the layoff last time. He was in a maiden claimer at Turfway. He was way better in that race, and I think he won it a lot easier than the final margin suggested he did. I liked the way that he looked in there. He looked like a different horse. He looked like a better horse to me. And then I think what put it over the top for me is that just Ward has great numbers with horses like this. Switching from synthetic to turf and sprints, he has great numbers with horses like this.
Yeah, he was one of the horses in this race I just really didn't know what to do with. And at the end of the day, I mean, we'll see if I'm right about the price on this horse. He was one of the most difficult horses to set a morning line on this race, because you never know how they're going to bet these Ward horses. It sort of feels like sometimes people bet these horses just because they feel like Ward is trying to put one over, when all of his horses seem to have weird press performances like this, where they're coming out of lower level races and moving up. I mean, I guess it's a good sign that he's not running him for a tag. Right. He does have to improve. I just wasn't quite sure what to do with him. I did see those stats, the same stats as you. I'll kind of go in Formulator and pull one up. You mentioned dirt sprints. I looked up specifically horses that were going synthetic to turf and coming off a victory last time out. And he is 25%. It's a smaller sample, but $3.63 ROI. So yeah, he just has great synth to turf numbers in general. So I think this horse is interesting based on that. Yeah, you mentioned the horse that I put on top, Mike. That would be the number 8, Showdown King. I just think he makes a lot of sense in this race. Linda Rice, I feel like she used to do this with way more success than she does now, claiming horses for surface switches and getting them on the turf, because I was looking up some of her stats in Formulator, and she has terrible stats switching horses over to turf these days, especially after they've broken their maidens. Even off the claim, this horse obviously raced off the claim on the dirt, but now he's going first time turf, second off the claim for her. I guess Linda has sort of figured out that she can have a lot more success claiming dirt horses, and she just doesn't claim as many horses for turf anymore. But I don't mind this horse getting on the turf based on what I've seen from him. He ran one of his better races on the synthetic. The horse that beat him that day, Chiringo, he's actually turned out to be a pretty good horse. He didn't run that well in his next start, but he came back on the dirt at Oaklawn and ran 2 big speed figures. If you're looking at the buyer scale, an 87 and a 91, 2 and 3 starts later. So he's a horse of some quality. And I thought Showdown King was no match for him, but ran on decently for second in that race. And when you look up his pedigree, it is one of these G. Watts Humphrey turf families that is turf through and through. His dam B Rocket was not one of the better horses in the family, but she clearly was a turf horse. You can even look up the second dam, 60 Rockets. She was a pretty good turf horse, ran in some stakes races, an allowance winner who were in buyers in the low 90s. So this horse has the pedigree to really move up on the grass. We'll see if he can do it. Like I said, the stats for Linda aren't good, but I feel like this one could at least be a decent price. But again, this was a really difficult race to make a line for.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, I feel like it is the kind of race though where you want to search a little bit. I mean, sometimes that's a really bad idea to just go looking for alternatives for no reason. I feel like there's a reason to do it in this race. You know, listen, maybe the horses that drawn inside and outside that looks sort of logical, maybe that'll show up and run their race here and that'll be all she wrote. But I feel like there's a lot more going on in this race.
Yeah, I mean, I even found a weird stat for trainer Tom Morley on the number 9 Devil's Key, claiming that horse first off the claim, first time turf. He's 3 for 8 with sort of a hilarious $15 ROI. He had a couple of huge priced winners in there. Who knows? That horse has some turf pedigree as well. You can make a case for a lot of horses in this field, and it does make it especially difficult to narrow down for the purposes of a pick 5 sequence. Yes. All right, let's move on to race 6. It is the grade 3 Peter Pan. And I think our colleague Dave Gretting broke some news about this race earlier today as we're recording this on Thursday that we're expecting a couple of scratches. The number 4, Lonesome Boy, I believe he's expected to run in the long branch instead. And the number 5, Tuscan Gold. I think Chad Brown was just sort of entering him in this race to maybe give himself one more day to make a decision. But he is expected to run the Preakness instead. So that's likely to reduce this field to a group of 6 runners. I still think it's an interesting race, even after those expected scratches, Mike, because you've got some horses in this field that maybe aren't at the level of the runners that we just saw in the Kentucky Derby last week yet, but I'm not convinced that some of them can't get there in the future because there is potential in this group.
I agree. There's a lot. I think there's a lot of potential in this group. You're right. Even with the scratches, and it does kind of feel like Tuscan Gold was maybe going to be the horse to beat if he started here, but he's not going to. So maybe it opens things up even a little bit more. I'll be honest, David. Listen, there's 6 left. If you told me right now that I had to just make a case for any one of these horses to win, I feel like I could make a convincing one. And if you told me I had to do the opposite and make a convincing case that any one of these horses can't win, I feel like I could do that too. There's a lot going on in here. I think there is some real ability. Trips, I do think are going to be pretty important in this race. I don't know. I kind of feel like the key to the race to me, and maybe the Wine Steward, the number 3, with the scratches now, maybe he's the horse to beat now. I don't think I'd argue too hard with that. Maybe he was the horse to beat anyway. I think the key to the race, though, is now the 6 Deterministic and just what he does out of the Wood Memorial now, because he was just a total no-show in that race first time around 2 turns. And so it just sort of throws everything into question. He looked so good in his first 2 starts, and he was terrible last time.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do with this horse, Mike. And I guess price is going to determine how you view him at the end of the day. Obviously, you won't see what odds he is if you're crafting a pick 5 wager. Right. But I mean, I could see him being 5-2, 3-1 in this race. I could see him being more like 4-1, 9-2. I'm not quite sure how they're going to assess this horse because he ran that big race in the Gotham, and he looked like a horse that had so much potential at that point. I wish there was some excuse for his Wood Memorial, because he seemed like he was a little too keen in the early stages. He wasn't settling quite as well as he did in the Gotham, trying to just run off a little bit on Joel Rosario in the early stages of that race. I guess maybe a slower pace, you could expect that to happen a little bit, but he was done so early in that race. You were hoping to hear some kind of excuse out of the barn. They said that they were sort of left scratching their heads about it. They're going to run him here just to try to get more answers about whether or not he's a horse that can, well, A, handle 9 furlongs, but B, is as effective on a fast track. I guess that has to be a concern, because even though he handled it on debut, he really did put forth his breakout effort in the Gotham, which was that sloppy surface. Personally, I'm going to take the negative view of him here. I wonder if he's a horse that is ultimately going to be better going a little bit shorter than this. One that will maybe want some one-turn races. I even wonder if he's a horse that's ultimately going to want the turf, just based on the way he moves and looking at his pedigree, which there are a lot of turf influences on the bottom side. And given as well as he ran on a sealed track, that's something I would think about for the future, though obviously that would be sort of the last resort for this horse, given how much promise he showed early in developing stallion prospects. You want to exhaust opportunities on the dirt first. But I ended up taking a negative view of him here, Mike, even though I respect his talent.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's not an easy call. I'm with you too, though. Like I've always had in the back of my mind that you might see this horse on the grass at some point. Maybe it won't happen. Listen, I thought his debut was super, and obviously he was really good in the Gotham. He'd be such an easier call too if he did something in the Wood. Like, he didn't even make a run to contention where you felt like, oh, he made a run and then he flattened out. Maybe the distance got him or whatever it was. He just didn't do anything in there. And as you've already pointed out, Rosario was working so hard from a long way out in that race that boy, it's really hard to have a lot of confidence in him. Now, to me, if nothing else, he's a real wild card at this point. I don't think I could bet him. The scratches just make him an even shorter price. And so there's just no way that I could bet him in here. The other horses, again, the Wine Steward, I guess, I have no knots on this horse, David. I'm just not totally sold on him. And I never have been. Listen, I thought he ran really well in the Breeders' Futurity last year when he just missed to locked. He had an absolute perfect trip that day. And he was only second best, but he still ran a really good race. His Lexington off the layup was another rock solid performance. I have no knots on this horse. I just don't really want to bet him at a short price because, as we've already started talked about, I think there are cases to be made for everybody in this field. And I don't think as good as the Wine Steward's been in his last 2 starts, I don't think he, has that much of an edge on these horses. The longer I looked at this race, and then as I was going through it, I got word that these horses were going to scratch, and so I went back and I looked at it again, and I got really interested in the 8 Native Land, and I wound up putting them on top, and I'll bet a few dollars on this horse, assuming the price holds up. And you can certainly chime in on this horse, David. I like all 4 of his races, even his first 2 career starts that he didn't win and he didn't get figures. This horse ran in both of them. The first one from well off the pace, the second one while up there on a really solid pace, and a horse that got a perfect trip ran him down. His last 2 races are really, really good. A big move at Oaklawn 2 starts back. I gave him even extra credit. I don't know if you want to, chime in on this, the Keeneland race last time in the stop. I gave him extra credit for winning that race. The horse that wound up second to him, Harton, who I think is okay, got the jump on this horse around the final turn. That is the short stretch going a mile and a 16th at Keeneland. And he still he angled out from behind that horse and still came and ran him down. He looks to me like a horse who will get this distance with no problem. I don't think the mile and 1/8 is any issue for this horse. Is he good enough to beat these horses? I don't know. Maybe not. I think this horse is pretty good, though.
Yeah, I did not put Native Land on top, but I took a long look at him, and I ended up liking him quite a bit in this race. He's my second pick. He's a horse I would definitely use in the pick 5 sequence. The scratches do hurt the price a little bit, but I mean, it also makes it a more winnable race for a horse like him who does need to get faster. And I agree. I saw the same things in this Keeneland race that we just took a look at here. Had to alter course a little bit at the top of the stretch. I mean, he was pretty game in that spot, and he got some rides at Oaklawn that it seemed like they were just trying to figure out what kind of horse he is. I mean, his debut, they made that wide move around the far turn that was a little premature. They were way more aggressive with him second time. They went back to the original tactics in his third start and timed it better, and he was so impressive in that race, putting the field away. I wish he had faced slightly better horses, Mike, because I have trouble placing his quality compared to some others in this field. Because even though I agree with you that maybe that Keeneland field was better than you might take away if you just looked it up in Formulator and saw the buyers that the horse ran coming in there and out of there, it seems like it was a weak race. But I agree, those horses have more potential than the bare numbers might make you think. But still, it feels like he's got to take another step forward. I couldn't quite get there with him, but he's a horse that I definitely want to use because I do think he's going to be a reasonable price in this race, or maybe the biggest price on the board of what's left in this field. Yeah. I'll just briefly touch on the Wine Steward since you brought him up earlier. I don't know, Mike. I don't love that Lexington. I know that he and Encino finished way ahead of the field. There were some major no-shows in that race who just seemed like they were totally gassed from trying some Triple Crown preps earlier on, and there really wasn't a whole lot of running going on behind those two. And I felt that I don't think that the entire Keeneland meet was as biased as some people do, but I felt especially the two-turn races on that April 13th card, if you had rail position, it really benefited you. And it's hard to watch that Lexington and not feel like the horses that were on the inside have their performances enhanced a little bit. And Encino definitely fits that bill. The Wine Steward, I think, to a lesser extent. I mean, he was on the rail almost the entire way until going outside of Encino to try to pass him in the stretch. He got very good trips in both two-turn starts. I don't know if I view him as a horse that really gets better with added distance. And I feel like a mile and an eighth could maybe expose him as a horse that doesn't really want to go this far. But he, I guess, is the horse to beat in this race. I just thought now he was going to be a pretty short price, and I wanted to look elsewhere. I took a long look at Antiquarian, who ran okay in the Louisiana Derby. His starts prior to that I thought were also fine. The Louisiana Derby is a race that I feel like, while Catching Freedom ran well in the Kentucky Derby, the overall quality of the race is still somewhat in question, given how the entire field came together at the end. And even Agate Road, I think, was only beaten about 4 lengths in that race. And I don't think much of him as a dirt horse. So I'm not sure I want to totally buy the speed figure for Antiquarian last time, whether you're looking at buyers or TimeformUS or any number. It came up fast. I kind of want to see it again. And I just kept going back to the number 2, Unique Insight, who, with the scratches, especially the scratch of Lonesome Boy, probably going to find himself on the front end. I know he's a little behind Antiquarian on the pace projector. I think if the pace projector were only basing it on the last race for Unique Insight, he'd probably be a little more forward because he set a legitimate pace in that two-turn event and just kept going. And you could say it was the slop, but I think he's a horse that has just been taking steps forward in every start. He was one that just seemed like a little unprepared for his debut. The atypical Chad Brown runner that just wasn't quite developed yet at the end of his 2-year-old season. And he's just taken a step forward and learned his lessons in each subsequent start. I like that Eric Cancel has been so aggressive with this horse, especially last time in this replay that we're taking a look at, because Eric is not always the most aggressive rider, but when he's riding a speed horse for Chad Brown, that feels like one of the few times that he really is aggressive out of the starting gate. And it often pays dividends for him. He actually has a kind of a crazy ROI riding horses for Chad Brown. And I just think he's going to find himself in the lead here. And I know he wants this distance, whereas I find myself questioning that for a couple others in this race, particularly the Wine Steward.
Yeah, I agree with all that stuff. I'll be honest, this horse, I wasn't thrilled with this horse's first few starts. And I know Chad tried different things. He tried to switch to the turf. He put the blinkers on for that return to dirt on New Year's Eve. And I felt like the blinkers didn't help this horse at all. He actually looked like he got a little intimidated in that race when horses came alongside him. So I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I just didn't know what to do with him off of the maiden win 2 starts back, just because I didn't really think much of that field. And he got a perfect trip in that race. But he certainly improved that day. He improved again last time. I'm with you. To me, my favorite part of the win last time, and listen, he basically had control of that thing all the way around. But my favorite part of that race was the start, because it felt like Cancel had a plan. He wanted the lead with this horse. He got it. And then he made that field pay, earning a figure that makes him a really strong contender in here. Listen, you're right. Maybe it was the wet track, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe this horse is just getting good right now.
Yeah, typically I wouldn't like one number horses like this, Mike, but I feel like this one is at least going to be a decent price. Probably more like 4 or 5 to 1 after the scratches. But when Chad Brown horses start getting better, I feel like you typically are just supposed to believe it because those horses typically hold their form. Not often you see Chad Brown horses spring a big number and it's some total fluke. So I think this horse might turn out to be okay, and he's supposed to get the right kind of trip in here. I think we pretty much covered who we're interested in. I think the one horse we didn't spend much time on is Protective. He is a maiden competing in this race. He ran okay in the Wood Memorial. I just wonder if he'd be better served by actually dropping a class to run in a maiden race before tackling tougher once again.
Yeah, that's how I look at him too. I mean, his wood is actually pretty good. And I do think, if nothing else, the one thing that I think could make him even more interested in here, David, is that pace projector up there, they have him last. I don't think this horse is going to be last early, breaking from the rail. I mean, he had real trouble. He did not break well in the Wood Memorial last time. I think that sort of left him behind the 8 ball. He actually ran okay, but his race prior to that, he got forward. And this horse breaking from the rail in this race, I think he can get forward again. And maybe just, get into the right kind of a tripper. I just don't like that they're running him in this race. But listen, maybe ultimately he will be this kind of horse.
Yeah, these connections do run a lot of horses in races like this over their head, and we'll see. Yeah. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Yep. Well, let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. It's the final stakes on this card, race 7, the Grade 2 Man o' War, mile and 3/8 the distance on the inner turf course. And I don't know, Mike, I thought this came up a pretty strong edition of the Man o' War. Obviously, you're always helped in terms of field quality when Charlie Appleby decides to ship a couple over. And it seems like he's keeping a string in the United States this year, or at least consistently shipping in new blood to compete in some of these races. And I mean, it's great to see. You want to see these races come up as strong as possible. And having Silver Knot and Nation's Pride in here certainly helps towards that end, although I'm sure some of the connections of the other horses might not be pleased to see 2 Charlie Appleby runners in the field. I guess we should start the conversation with the 2 of them and how you separate them. I mean, on paper, Nation's Pride is just obviously the more accomplished of the 2. I mean, based on what he did through that Turf Triple Series in 2022, and then even last year where they ran him all over the globe. And aside from that final start in Bahrain, he generally ran pretty well. He's a horse that doesn't seem to need a specific distance. He can go 1.25 miles out to 1.5 miles. So this is supposed to suit him right down to the ground. I've never been a total believer in this horse, Mike. I thought it was kind of crazy when he went favored in the Breeders' Cup Turf at the end of 2022. I feel like he's been advantageously placed in some spots. And while he has run well, and he's probably turned out to be a better horse than maybe I thought he was going to be back a couple of years ago, I don't necessarily want to take that sort of price on him in this race.
Yeah, I don't either. And to sort of drive home that point that you're making there about he's been really well managed. I mean, I think it's one of those things, like when you look at some of the races he's running, you're like, well, where would you want them to run this horse? They ran him in the Epsom Derby. They came over here to run in that Triple Turf Series, where they just thought that those were the races for him, a lot of money on the line, and he did well in that series. They ran him in the Dubai Turf last March, and he ran pretty well in that race too. So maybe we're just being a little too hard on him, but at the same time, the Canadian International that he won 2 back with the big figure, that used to be a really strong race. It's really not that much anymore. And certainly it wasn't last year. That was not a strong field. He certainly ran well to win it, but he just didn't really beat a superior field that day. I'm sort of with you. I've never really liked this horse. Not that I'm, wildly against him in races like this, but I don't know. I didn't feel like I needed a short price on him. I actually feel like his stablemates was a tougher call for me because I didn't really like this horse that much as a 3-year-old. He ran some okay races, but I was not a fan of his. I did not think he was that good. And, they stretched him out last time and he got the job done. I'm happy to let you chime in on this and you tell me what you think. He ran fine in there. I thought he had the best trip in the race. And, to me, it's just not that significant when guys stretch horses out like this. And then they suddenly seem like they improve. We see Mike Maker do it all the time. And people always wonder how that happens. To my opinion, most of the times when that happens, the reason it happens is because there just aren't that many good horses running in those longer distance races. So if you can get the trip, and this horse obviously got the 1.5 miles, then you can sort of make hay in those spots. And I think some trainers have figured that out. That's how I look at Silver Knot. I think the horses that ran second and third to him are good horses, but this horse had the best trip in the race. And I think he just sort of made those horses pay in there.
Yeah, I saw reporting on our site that Miss the Cut is going over to Royal Ascot. I guess good luck with that. I also think the other thing going on in the Elkhorn was Bold Act, his stablemate, who took all the money in there, just refused to settle early in the race.
Yeah.
And he probably didn't run his A race due to that. And it sort of created an opportunity for Silver Knot to win the race at a better price. Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, Mike. He got a great trip. He also did really get the distance. I mean, he's a horse that always had pedigree for it, and I was kind of skeptical based on watching his races and the way he was finishing last year that he would run to that pedigree. But when you look at his dam side, I mean, he's bred to go like 2 miles. I mean, his dam wanted to run as far as they wrote races, and I mean, the dam's a half sister to a horse whose name I'm forgetting now, but another one who just loved the marathon distances and over Europe. Yeah, maybe this horse just really wanted to go longer all along, and now he's finally coming into his own doing that. I'm not going to discount that possibility. And when I'm looking at the relative prices at what I'm expecting these two horses to be, I'd rather take Silver Knot at a price around 3-1, 7-2, as opposed to Nation's Pride, who I think could be under 2-1 in this race. And I'm not totally warming up to him. And the other point I'll make about Silver Knot, Mike, is that class of 3-year-olds that he was competing against in 2023 was a better group than the 3-year-olds that Nation's Pride was beating up on in 2022. So even though Silver Knot wasn't winning those races, I'm not sure he was running so much worse than Nation's Pride was a year later. So I think he's legitimate in this race. I think both of these Appleby horses obviously can win, and I just thought Silver Knot might offer slightly better value. Sounds like you're looking somewhere else. I've got another horse I'm interested in too, Mike, so I'll let you take it away with who you like.
Yeah, I do think that there was a way to look at this and just want some other words. And just to your point on Silver Knot, I think it's a good one in that maybe the added distance really did help him. And that's certainly a valid way to look at him. My only issue with that is if you looked at him that way, then you were probably supposed to bet him last time and not this time. But listen, we'll see. Maybe he will be a fair price anyway because his stablemate takes all the money in here. I'll wait and see about that stuff. This is a race where I wanted to make a case for just about everybody. The real issue that I have, I feel like out of the Pan Am, which 3 of these horses are in, I feel like you're supposed to go back to the horse that won that race again in this spot. Listen, the thing that bothers me about that race is that Harry Hood was beating a nose. So listen, I get he's another horse that they've stretched out since they claimed him, and it's been a really good claim for Hennig, and they've stretched him out, and he's run better races, but it's hard to get excited for a horse that beat Harry Hood by a nose, in my opinion. But I do think that maybe Cortez has more going for him than that. I'm a little concerned that longer is better for him. I'm a little concerned that dropping back even a little bit in distance here doesn't help Cortez. But I thought he ran well in that race. And so he was the one I wanted out of the Pan Am. I didn't want the horse to finish. I didn't want Harry Hood. And I certainly didn't want Tawny Port, although I feel like some people might watch that race and feel like, well, he got in a little bit of traffic there and it was too late. And then when he got clear, he might have won the race if things had played out differently. I'm not a Tawny Port fan. I don't like really any of his turf races. And I don't want him in this race. I actually still feel like he's a better dirt horse, but I don't think we'll ever see him on dirt again. And listen, so the more I looked at this race, David, the more I just wanted alternatives. And I decided that I'm going to take Ohana Honor in this race. This isn't a horse that you're supposed to like off his most recent start. He's another horse that they stretched out for the first time, and he handled the distance fine and he won, but he did it with a really soft trip on the lead where they let him walk. That's not the race you're supposed to like him off of, I don't think, although he ran well in there and he did finish, which makes me feel like the distance is no issue for him. I like him off of his other turf races. And I don't know if you want to speak to that. I know that prior to that race, he was only 1 for 5 on the turf. I thought that he ran well in every one of those races. He got unlucky more than once, in my opinion. And I'm mostly referencing here the Gio Ponte at the end of last year. I thought he ran great in there with no chance to win. And I just feel like this horse is good. You can kind of do anything with him. He's okay on dirt. He's good on turf. You can put him up close to the pace. You can sit back and make a run. Distances seem like there are no issues for this horse. He's won 7 furlongs on dirt. He's won 1.5 miles on the turf. I don't know. I just like this horse. I think he's still underrated. Kind of wish he didn't have that last race showing because he'd be a much bigger price. But I think this horse is good. And I don't think he's necessarily overmatched by these horses. I guess we'll find out.
You kind of took the words out of my mouth, Mike, because I was going to say he'd be interesting to me at 12 or 15 to 1 in this race, because I think the last race makes it look like, oh, he's suddenly kind of like Silver Knot, a horse that took a huge step forward going a marathon distance, and now he's a graded stakes horse. We're showing the replay of that race at Keeneland last time. I don't know what to do with that race, because I think there were like 5 or 6 marathon races they ran at Keeneland during this recent meet. And it just felt like there was no movement in the stretch of any of them. And there were 2 marathons on this card in particular, April 14th, both going a 1.5 mile distance. And it's funny, Craig's not on the podcast this week, but if he were on, I would tease him about those 2 races, because originally when Craig put out the speed figures for that day, he gave like those 2.5 mile races like numbers that would win the Breeders' Cup Turf. And it's like, I said to him, like, I know those 2 races came up ridiculously fast, but like those fields were not that good. Like, there were a lot of horses in that Ohana Honor race who had never gone a marathon distance before. He got the distance, and it just felt like a lot of others didn't. And the only other horse that could really get the distance foreign relations just probably needed to race off the layoff. So I feel like Ohana Honor ran fast, but was kind of beating nothing, and he's going to take money off that. So I kind of downgraded him based on that. But I also hear the other part of what you're saying, and I don't disagree, that I really liked his Gio Ponte last year, and not the ideal trip in the Tropical Park Derby. So he's got races that make him interesting. I'll be interested to see what price he is in this race. And the other problem I had, Mike, was that he's not going to get that trip he got last time, because I think we do have to mention, I don't think he needs it either, but I think we do have to mention that there are 2 ridiculous horses in this race in So High and Rocket and Roll for the same connections. Nightfall Chatterpaul, who once, I think, won this race at like 100 to 1 a few years ago, and now just takes crazy shots in the race every year. Look, So High sometimes can take a field a long way on the front end. I kind of wonder what they're going to do with Rocket and Roll if he does indeed run in this race, because he's another horse with speed. So I think it's worth mentioning, because it could take some horses out of their game. A horse like Harry Hood, who you brought up, speaking of that Pan American, who I think Gulfstream is the kind of course that can flatter a horse like Harry Hood, a horse who might be deficient a little bit in the class department, but can be forward in turf races and get carried along a little bit. And I'm not going to let it bother me too much that he was part of the finish in that Pan American, because it was Gulfstream, and you see a lot of horses sometimes run over their ability on the turf at Gulfstream, especially those with his kind of style. And watching back that race, unsurprisingly, we have the exact same take on it. I thought that Tawny Port kind of had the trouble that's going to suck people in, but is not the kind of trouble that you want to bet back, because he might have won that race by a neck, if not for the trouble, and done so with an absolutely perfect trip. And we'd be saying he's a horse you don't want because he got a perfect trip. So it's kind of splitting hairs to say, the trouble cost him the race. Now you do want him. I agree with you, Mike. And I ended up putting Cortez on top and taking a liking to him in this race, because Clement, when he gets these European shippers, he generally doesn't do as well as some others do, like a Chad Brown. And even though he doesn't have great numbers second off a layoff in Formulator, I feel like this is the kind of horse that actually might pan out for him over time, because even more so than liking his Pan American, I like this horse's races in France. He kept a really good company in a lot of those races. I mean, Place de Carousel, who won that race 3 back. I mean, she came back and won the Prix Foix before obviously not doing well in the Arc. But I mean, he faced some legitimate Group 2 horses over in Europe, and didn't necessarily have the turn of foot in those races to win them, but consistently ran well. And I liked how he finished off that race last time. I think he could have 4 to go. I agree. 1.5 miles, 1 mile and 5/8 might be better than him than 1 mile and 3/8. But given the presence of those 2 crazy speed horses that could really increase the pace of this race, I know he's going to be finishing strongly. And I think he's one that could be the right price here, especially if those Charlie Appleby runners take as much money as I think they will.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think we pretty much covered that one. One horse I wanted to get your take on, Mike, and I was kind of wondering if you might like this horse, because it seems like your kind of horse based on, knowing how you handicap these races sometimes, is the number 6 Greek Order. Yeah. He does have upside. I didn't know what to do with him in this race. It's interesting that he's running in here, and I think we should just discuss him because of that.
Yeah, I boy, you know me too well, I guess. I really took a long look at this horse, and really did think about. I don't even think I have it in there anywhere as far as my picks go. But I thought about throwing him in. I'll be honest, I'm a little concerned about the distance. He has a huge pedigree on the bottom, but I wonder if he's really going to ultimately be like a true staying kind of horse. I actually watched all of his races over in Europe, and boy, did he run well in some of them. I mean, he clearly has some talent, this horse. And I feel like, the Keeneland race off the layup, you just want to be a little lenient there. He didn't break well. He was very hard to handle early in that race, ran up on horses into the first turn there. And just things didn't go that well for him. And then he just sort of finished evenly after moving wide. But I feel like he showed that he probably needed that start. And I think he is going to run a lot better in here. I ultimately just couldn't talk myself into him, but I'm not going to be surprised when he runs really well in this race.
Yeah, if this race came up a little softer, I might have put him on top because he is interesting. And I agree with everything you said about his European races. He seemed like he was a really progressive sort last year. And that Keeneland race just didn't set up for him. I'll use him somewhere, maybe not so much in a pick 5 sequence, but if I'm playing exactas and tries in this race, he's the kind of horse that I could see getting a piece of this.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, let's close this pick 5 sequence out with race 8. It is a New York bred maiden special weight event going 6 furlongs. Not an easy way to close out this sequence because I think there are 2 horses in here that are going to take the bulk of the play in the number 3 Granadilla and the number 4 Mulkey, both going out for Top Barnes, Rick Dutrow and Brad Cox. And they're both okay. They both have speed, which is probably going to help them in this race. I can't say that I'm thrilled with any of the races, though, Mike.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, I feel like they are, first of all, they're the right starting off point for this race. I personally, I'll be interested to hear your take on this. Maybe you don't like either of them, but if you had to take one, I really don't like the 4 in this race at all. I mean, I guess we'll see what happens with this horse. Brad Cox second. Now, this horse obviously got bet very hard first time out. I thought all in all, and I know that the horse that beat him, who was also a first-time starter, ran well that day and came back to win again. I just didn't think this horse ran very well first time out for a horse who took that kind of money. So of the 2, I really don't want the 4. I'm willing to be wrong about that, especially in this pick 5 sequence. We've been going through it. I don't think that many opinions at really big prices. So I'm just against the 4 in here to see what happens. I'm a way more bullish on the 3. I thought this horse's debut was actually pretty good. I think that he had a lot of things, or she had a lot of things go wrong for her. I thought early in that race, just didn't settle after the start, just pulled her way up there to be part of that pace and got tired. But I thought she did some racing, and I liked that Dutrow sort of put her away after that, brought her back last time. Once again, she didn't get out of the gate that well, but just raced up with speed. I think the horse that ultimately closed her down is actually pretty good. So I'm going to be fine with her most recent start and suspect that now that she's putting races together, that she's just going to run a lot better in this race. I personally think she's the horse to beat. You made her the morning line favorite. I thought she was the horse to beat in here. And I was very interested in the number 2 in Flammabelle, who I feel like really took a step forward last time going 7. Another horse who showed pretty big speed early in that race and then got tired but didn't quit in that race. Some of those closers came for her in there, and she did not quit. I thought that was a very underrated performance.
Yeah, and if we're going to compare form lines, Mike, I mean, Inflammabelle got beat a length and a quarter by Peony, who was the horse that came back and beat Granadilla in her next start. And Granadilla's going to be a much shorter price. So I think Inflammabelle is very interesting. I definitely have her in the mix in this race. And, turning back to the 6, it's only going to help her. She's got, I just loved how much speed she showed in that last race. And she arguably went a little too fast early for the 7 furlong distance. But I agree. She ran pretty well in that race. As far as your question about which of the favorites I prefer, I put Mulkey over Granadilla in my picks. I wouldn't say that I really have a great preference between the 2 of them. I guess what I would say about Granadilla, and the reason that I'm a little bit against her, is that she's taken so much money in both starts, and she hasn't really delivered yet. I hear you. She did run better last time. But I will say the margin was a length and 3/4. That felt like a margin that could have been 4 lengths if Peony was ridden through the wire. And I don't often say that, but I mean, and I'll show the end of the race. I mean, that winner was really geared down to the point that she was at a walk, a 16th of a mile past the finish line. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit of an optical illusion that the margin wasn't greater. She's run fine, and I think that was a better field than she's facing here. So, I mean, I expect her to run well. I just was left a little cold by the prices she's been. And the fact that Irad Ortiz is on board again and she's going to get bet again. Mulkey was no doubt facing a worse field. I get that the winner came back and won, wasn't beating much. I guess it's just respect for Brad Cox. I feel like I often don't like horses like this, and they just run well anyway.
Right.
So I've got her in there. I don't know, Mike. I was looking for somebody in this race that was a little interesting, and I just at every turn was coming up at a dead end. And I ended up taking a long look at a horse that might be totally crazy and finished. The number 7, Carol T, because the first start of her career, I didn't think it was bad at all. Beaten by My Main Squeeze and Dolomite. That was a really strong Saratoga maiden special weight. Those two horses have panned out to be okay. One a graded stakes winner, the other graded stakes placed later in the year. Her second start, I mean, it was at Parks. It was a sloppy track. She couldn't get us forward and just didn't seem to run her race. And then subsequently, it seemed like something was going wrong in her races. Jose Ortiz in the stretch of that October 22nd race, it seemed like he felt something was going amiss with her. She was veering in and out. He was reluctant to ride her. I get Jose Ortiz seems reluctant to ride a lot of horses in the stretch, but this one in particular was all over the track. And then, they changed up her equipment a couple times. They put a different kind of bridle on her that you could see in the last race. And she just didn't look like she was traveling comfortably in a few of those starts. They put her away. Now she's coming back off a layoff. I like that she got a freshening based on what I had seen. She's getting Lasix for the first time. I don't know if it was a breathing issue or bleeding or something that was bothering her in those races, but there once was ability with this horse, and now she's totally dirtied up. She's going to be a huge price in this race. And if she gets back to her debut, it's not that much worse than the two favorites. So it's a little bit of a reach, but I don't know if it's that big of a reach given what I think of the rest of this field.
I don't think it is either. I'm glad you actually brought that horse up because I also took a really long look at her because I still remember her debut at Saratoga and thinking that she ran well in that race. And I was even willing to give her the benefit of the doubt for the return to this track at the end of October where she faced Dolomite again and she has no chance to beat that horse. She didn't run well that day, but she just had no chance to win that race anyway. Listen, I'm glad that you really dug into those last two races. And maybe you're right. Maybe there just was some issue that was holding her back. She was terrible in those two races. And that's the only thing that threw me off. After I looked at her for a long time, I was like, if she gets back to her debut, she's a very interesting horse, but she was so bad in those last two starts. And I can't take her, but I could certainly see using her somewhere in this race.
Yeah, I don't feel confident, but I do feel like she's going to be a pretty big price in this race, and I can take a shot with her based on that, especially given my opinions on the horses that are going to be shorter prices. Well, Mike, I think we covered everybody you need to talk about in that leg. You could jump in if you had a different idea that I didn't touch upon. But we do a lot of talking on this podcast, and I know the listeners like when we do a brief recap and sort of go over our pick, so some people don't have to listen to the entire thing. So from the standpoint of playing this pick 5 sequence, I mean, you don't have to give out a ticket, and I'm sure you're not the kind of person that's just going to play one ticket. But I mean, how would you sort of break it down race by race, and who are the horses that you're sort of looking to upgrade in this sequence?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like, the stakes races to me were, particularly the first one is just the one that really bothers me because I feel like I'm almost, I don't have anybody that I want to make cases for in here. And I feel like I'm going to be left leaning on straight no chaser in there just because I don't like the alternatives. And that's usually the kind of race that will just keep me out of a pick 5 entirely. But we'll see. I mean, in that leg, I feel like the interesting leg is really the second one. And I do want to see how they bet that thing. But I do really want to sort of try to get that Ward horse in there. That'll be sort of the main part of my ticket in there just because I don't feel like there's anybody to be that afraid of in that race. The two bookends, the 1 and the 10. Yeah, I probably want to use them somewhere, but I want other horses in that second leg there. And I'm really interested in the Ward horse, the number 3. I'm going to use a lot of native land in the Peter Pan. I get that it's not an easy race for him, but to me, that's the race, especially with the scratches, where you're going to have perhaps the two favorites are the Wine Steward and Deterministic. I don't think either one of those horses has to win. So I'm gonna sort of play this pick 5 against those two horses and try to fill it in. I'll use your horse, those that you have on top in that race, Unique Insight. I'll use Native Land, maybe throw in the Pletcher, one of the Pletcher horses. But I'm going to try to beat the favorites in that leg. And then, listen, when you start talking about the Man of War, I'm definitely using Ohana Honor in that race, and I'm going to use Cortez in that race and try to beat the Godolphin Appleby horses, which may be suicide. they win all these races. But I felt like that was the kind of race where I could use just the horses that I, personally like a little bit better at much better prices.
And for me, kicking off this sequence, I'm against Straight No Chaser from the standpoint of picking against him. I just think he's a horse that's not going to offer great value coming off the layoff. From the standpoint of the pick 5, he's a horse that I probably want to downgrade a little bit, even though he is the most likely winner. I just think the reward in beating him is worth the risk in here. So he'd be more of a B or C type for me in the first leg, and I would try to get through it primarily leaning on 24 Mamba and Joey Freshwater, just because I think they're going to be better prices, especially Joey Freshwater could be a bigger price in terms of a pick 5 than he will be in the win pool. As far as the 5th race goes, I would lean mostly on Showdown King and Power Attack, and my backups would be horses like Borletti and Devil's K. I don't think I responded to what you said about P Money, but I agreed with all of it, which is why I didn't elaborate on all of that. In the 6th race, I'm gonna upgrade Unique Insight, who is my top pick, and I also like Mike's horse Native Land. So they'll be either my two A's, or I'll make Unique Insight the A and Native Land the B. But for me, there's going to be enough reward in trying to beat the Wine Steward, who I have some skepticism about, and Deterministic, who I'm just gonna let beat me in this race. I have some real doubts about him. Antiquarian, I could throw him as a B or a C type in here, but he would be on a lower tier for me for sure. And then the Man of War, it's a tough one. I don't feel so confident in Cortez that I want to put all my eggs in that basket. He's definitely an A for me. Between the two Appleby runners, I think I'd be more likely to upgrade Silver Knot over Nation's Pride, but I do want to use both of them in some capacity. And Greek Order could be on like whatever C ticket I have with all the other A's that I'm using. And then to close it out in the 8th race, that Maiden special weight, I'll probably use Inflammabelle as an A along with my top pick, Carol T, and just hope that I can get some value out of a race where I think both of the favorites are going to be overbet, and I'll use them as backups, Granadilla and Mulkey. But I think the sequence could really pay if you beat those two to close it out.
Yeah, they're not invulnerable in there either. I mean, listen, maybe it'll just turn out that they're in the right field finally, and they'll be really tough in that race. But I don't think they're invulnerable either. I think Inflammabelle is really interested if she gets an aggressive ride in there.
Yeah, for sure, because it doesn't feel like the kind of race where the two favorites have shown that they really want to pass horses. Yeah. Well, Mike, this was great. I really appreciate you making the time to come on and talk about this. I feel like we don't get to work together often enough, so I really appreciate you getting on to discuss this really interesting Belmont at the Big A card on Saturday.
Yeah, I know. Agreed with all that stuff, Dave. I really appreciate the invite. I'm happy to do it anytime you need me to.
Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to the TimeformUS Forecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Now you can watch along with us on YouTube, hopefully showing some of the past performances, replays, and formulator stats is interesting and helpful to those that are watching on video. Everybody, again, thanks for tuning in. Craig will be back to recap some of these races when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.